Okay, so Out by Robert Frost. Okay, so it's a powerful poem about the transience of human life, the sort of precariousness of existence, and the way in which accidents can completely transform fate. So, firstly, the title, Out. It alludes to Shakespeare's Macbeth, which sort of explores the sort of futility of life, and you can argue the title sort of references the fact that it is a metaphor for life and death, this poem. And it also sort of reveals the pointlessness of life. Is Frost suggesting that life is just about work, and in that sense, is it really pointless? Okay, so firstly, we have this saw. We have these verbs. The saw snarled and rattled. The verb snarled and rattled immediately unsettles the reader in the first line. We have this personification of the saw, showing that it can harm you, which is very frightening to the reader. It's very bestial. This whole like rattle, maybe like a snake. It's unstable, it's reckless, it's uncontrollable, unpredictable. And then even more personification, the saw snarled. What this sibilance, this hissing, sort of, it's very sinister and unpleasant. And we have the repetition of snarled and rattled, and the pause there sort of builds suspense and tension and slows the pace and gives this pause. And then there's this idea of as if to prove saws know what supper meant. There's obviously personification showing that it's got this sort of confidence and determination to prove itself, and it suggests some kind of sort of sentience and intelligence to the saw. And the effect on the reader is perhaps it more sort of makes the boy more sort of relatable, and you can sympathise with him more. This sort of dangerous saw is a sort of evil force against him. Okay, so the boy, this noun, the boy, is very simple. There's no name, it's very vague. And it shows that he has sort of no identity. He's very insignificant. You could say he's insignificant to the men that he works around, and perhaps to the world. And we'll get to the sort of ending, you can look at that. We have this semantic field of innocence and youth, with these phrases like big boy, which is sort of very young, and there's this alliteration, big boy, which makes it really sort of youthful. And then there's this man's work, it's very sort of patronising tone, showing that he's not mature enough yet to deal with everything. And you could say because of this whole patronising tone, it's very sort of implying that this is criticism. And that calls the sort of wider theme of the fact that should he really be doing it? And the reader should sort of question that sort of thing. Is his life being ruined by, growing up too fast? And then when he exclaims, don't let him cut off my hand, you got this sort of really sort of childish, juvenile kind of tone, showing this sort of ignorance towards the danger. Does he really know of the seriousness? And then we have the sort of reader sympathy from his sort of sheer desperation, his exclamation, he's scared of the doctor. And then he sort of confides with the sister, which links to the theme of family relationships. And obviously he sort of blindly believes that she can help him when she can't. And there's also this sort of poor communication. There's obviously this irony because man has exploited nature, so then it takes this revenge on the child. Very ironic. And then the narrator talks about this half hour that a boy counts so much, which sort of links to this idea of a cruel world, and sort of has this sort of sense of regret. And the narrator says, I wish, and there's sort of this emotion from the narrator that's otherwise detached. I'll talk about when I talk about narration in a second. And there's this irony that he would be alive otherwise, wouldn't he? If this half an hour that the boy counts would have just been given to him. So the narrator, he says, call it a day, I wish they might have said. It's this idea of challenging determinism. If he'd been given a break, he wouldn't have gotten hurt. So there's this sort of sign of regret of what's happening. Okay, so now let's look at what the doctor does. There's this idea of the dark of ether. He puts him under the dark of ether. He puts, it's this idea of putting him to sleep to stop the pain for sort of a greater good. And that's something, Frost is calling attention to something like that. But there's this sort of really sinister portrayal of it, this sort of negative connotations of darkness, this foreshadowing death. It's really sort of a euphemism, this darkness, for the death. Okay, so now we have the family and community. It seems like everyone's isolated. You could say that no one has a name and no one has identity. We've got the sort of Watcher, the Doctor, and they have sort of these job titles. There is just one stanza. It's all just one thing, like a report or something like that, which could show some kind of isolation about the society. And then at the end, they turn to their affairs. This is the ending. No one's crying. There's just acceptance. Not every life can be mourned. There's this lack of sympathy. It's just a detached world. And you could say that this poem, especially with the ending, it's an expression of human callousness. It's just another death in nature's endless cycle. And then there's also this Watcher, this detached bystander, who could help but doesn't. So what is he saying about that? That people are just sort of apathetic and different? Okay, so the setting. This idea of those that lifted their eyes could count 5 mountain ranges and then the sunset. It's this sort of really ironic, romantic setting, which is obviously undermined by the sinister buzzing saw. It's this opposition of, the natural world, this sort of romantic nature, which represents freedom, and then this urban working world, which is, confining and unpleasant. It's buzzing, it's irritating, and you show them this is a lack of freedom in this society, this working society. And it's also very hopeless because they're all perhaps wishing of this sunset of maybe ambitions, and it's showing the sort of feelings within them that aren't fully, able to go anywhere. So we just go over to the narrator again, the narration. We have this sort of formal register. It's very report-like, business-like. There's no sort of jargon of any specific words. It's third person, but there's this first person statement, call it a day, which I said about earlier. And there's sort of this concern, clear involvement from the narrator, which is very bizarre. Okay, so structure, we have these sort of half rhymes, this assonance, yard and wood, which you could say creates a sense of foreboding because it's like something's wrong and unfulfilled. So it's very scary. This is only one stanza structurally. It's just a sort of informal conversational story, or like a report. There's no pause. It's very fluent. You can say there's a lot of sort of speed and tension in the story. It talks about this insignificance. It's just another day or event. Nothing special. Too not important enough to take up 2 sort of stanzas. And then there's a sort of enjambment, like in lines 1 and 21, when he gets injured, which helps kind of. And the first time there's enjambment, we get this sense of sort of freedom of the mountain range, this sort of liberation, goes through the line. And the last time it sort of creates this panic and sense of disorder because everything's going after another thing. Okay, so more on form and structure. We have blank verse used to convey the natural speech rhythms. The story starts in the middle of the events, which is interesting. There's repetition used to emphasise the sort of endlessness of the day's activity. We've got simple everyday language used by the poet. And you can say the natural flow is broken by caesuras in almost half the lines. They increase in number towards the end of the poem, often appearing earlier than expected in lines at unnatural parts of the line. These caesuras portray the emotionality underlying the narrator's restrained reporting style. They also correspond to the accident's abrupt break to the day-to-day rhythms of farm routine and the boy's foreshortened life. The poet, Frost, plays with the rhythms at key points to convey sort of further meaning. For example, when the hand is gone, he uses sort of end-stop lines. The missing beat has a sort of powerful effect on the reader and listener as it makes them pause and sense an absence in the rhythm, as well as the hand, at this turning point in the poem. Okay, so that is Out, Robert Frost.